Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Vault Podcast. We're back for another episode. Brent is with us. I'm Zan. Brent, how's it going?
Oh, not too bad. I do have to apologize right up front. I'm a little bit under the weather today, so if it sounds like I've got a cough drop swishing around in my mouth, I do apologize. It's because I do. And if I start hacking and coughing and sniffling, I mean, just bear with me. I'm trying to make it. So.
Yeah, right. We all know you've just been trying to sing too much King Diamond and you can't hit the high notes.
Well, I tried, but that's how I got my hernia in high school. So.
Yeah, we need to start a King Diamond high school choir.
That would actually be awesome. I would have loved school if we could have done that, man.
Oh yeah, me too. So what's been on your playlist or in your vehicle? What have you been listening to?
I've actually been listening to a lot of Opeth, not like, the real heavy, metal type Opeth. My favorite album of theirs, hands down, was kind of hard, but it's really just come out ahead, is the Damnation album.
Yeah, definitely.
And it is just so just atmospheric and kind of melancholy. I just listen to that and I can kind of zone out. Like I said, I've been feeling bad for about a week. You get something like Opeth, it's probably not the best music to listen to and you feel down, but, it's just what I've been in the mood for. That, and I discovered a Mongolian black metal band. I know I was talking to you about it a little bit earlier. It'll be one of our picks of the week. It's totally different than Opeth, mind you. I'm going to butcher the name, but it's like Tingur Cavalry. And if you guys get a chance, check it out. Like I said, it'll be one of our picks of the week. It's pretty interesting stuff. So, what about you? What do you got?
Actually, it's just kind of a strange coincidence with what our topic's going to be about today, but like a lot of Quiet Riot and Rat, honestly, like that just keeps popping up on my playlist on my iPod, and then a lot of Robin Trower. That Robin Trower is about the best mix of like hard rock and blues you can get. Very consistent, very awesome, catchy riffs, great vocals. They kind of lose me when they get into the 80s. I don't know, the stuff kind of gets worse, but all the stuff from the early 80s and then all the 70s stuff is good. So a lot of that, and then just kind of, we're so random, just comes whatever comes on my playlist. Satyricon, there's been a lot of Satyricon come on my playlist.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So that's all kinds of stuff. But like I said, we'll start off today. We're gonna do these every so often. We're gonna call them genre talk, and we're just gonna take a whole show. We're gonna talk about a certain genre of music or a subgenre, and tell you about how it started. What's the characteristics. That way you'll know if it's something you may or may not be interested in. And if you are, then we'll give you kind of our top. We'll each give you our top 5 bands, kind of to get you in. If you like this, if you like what we're talking about, this is the bands you need to go with. So today we're going to start with dreaded 80s hair metal, or as some people will call it, butt rock or glam. There's a lot of different things that'll be called. Kind of the origins of it, it kind of extended from the 70s glam stuff, like, I guess you could even go back, like Aerosmith, New York Dolls, kind of that stuff in the 70s is where it started out, and in the 80s it started getting into more of the, the Sunset Strip type, the LA bands, Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, Rat, Bon Jovi, Poison, Cinderella, Warrant, that's just stuff right off the top of my head. And then you start seeing bands like Kiss try to do, they took the makeup off and tried to go hair band. And, these bands this style all has a distinct sound. So right off the bat, like what's your first exposure to 80s hair bands?
Oh, man. My first exposure was, honestly, the only one as far back as I can remember. Like I said, I grew up a little bit. I grew up in the 80s, but I was still a kid, young enough that it's hard to remember. I remember my sister listened to a lot of LA Guns.
Oh, yeah, yep.
And, she did the Warrant. Poison is a big one that I remember. I don't know, I keep thinking that song Naughty Naughty.
Oh, yeah, Danger Danger.
Danger.
Yeah.
And for some, that song just kind of sums up the 80s to me.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
metal and everything. But yeah, it was actually, I don't know. I kind of hate to admit this, and out loud and in public, but a lot of my first exposure came through ballads that
Yep.
hair metal is known for.
Yes, that's actually one of my first exposures. First thing I can ever remember, though, is I didn't even know who they were at the time, but then I kind of put two and two together. When I would remember seeing Rat videos on MTV way back in the day. Body Talk. Like I remember that video, and then I heard it in the Golden Child with Eddie Murphy. Had that video in there, and they played that song, and I remember loving the movie, and the band stuck with me. So that was kind of my first band that I ever heard, and then the dreaded Monster Ballads album.
Yep.
In the mid to late '90s, I'd be watching pro wrestling or be watching football or something, and these terrible Monster Ballad songs would come on, and I'm like, people still listen to this garbage, and like a lot of it I still hate. But later on, a lot of it I started not liking the songs. But when you started getting into the bands, you would find that a lot of the other songs that the bands put out, which we've talked about that before, were really really awesome. And there's bands like Steelheart and Whitesnake. A lot of those bands the other stuff is just killer. But that hit song was the ballad, and I hated it. So, and you were talking about the kind of characteristics of it. We can get into that. Obviously the hair, that's the biggest thing that's going to turn. You see these and you're like, okay, this is a hair band. The Aquanet hairspray, their hair's stacked like 50 foot tall. Always, you couldn't tell a difference between the guys and the girls, which kind of funny how that's kind of come full circle with emo bands nowadays. But the music's a lot worse. Yeah, so makeup, hairspray, kind of neon colored clothes, bandanas and streamers hanging off everything they can tie them on. All kinds of bracelets. They would do metal spikes occasionally, because it is. They would take metal into consideration. It wasn't like they were trying to be. They wanted to look like a combination of Rob Halford and Barbie. Really, I think that's
great.
I think that's the best way to put it. So, does any other characteristics that you can think of stand out to you about just kind of what they all look like, appearance?
Just appearance and stuff. It was always, like you said, it was the big hair. Usually it was the big glasses, like the big sunglasses, like
Yep.
aviators that, was like half the size of their face. Like you said, leather and bright colors.
Yep.
And there was always like the rock star kicks and all that fun stuff too.
Yeah, the synchronized head banging and the playing guitar back to back, and it was either one or two facial expressions they always had. They either had like the biggest smiles in the world and you could tell they were having a blast, or they had the like sympathetic puppy dog look so they could get all the chicks. And
do the ballads, yeah.
Yeah. And that'll lead me into the next thing, is just kind of the sound of it. It's the hair bands. I can't say anything negative about the sound. No matter which of these bands you're listening to, I can't think of any time I've ever listened to them and not kind of been upbeat in a good mood. It's fun music. It's party music for some people, and that's what it was designed to do, is have a good time. And, they always throw the ballads in there, and that's kind of how they get all the chicks and kind of break it down. The guys like the other stuff. So what do you have to say about any characteristics of sounds you can think of?
Just really loud guitars and overly dramatic, stuff. And like you said, they were like two totally different bands. And you had your ballads that the women all loved, and then you had, I say all the women, a lot of the women all loved. And then you had your other stuff the guys would sit there and headbang to, but just bright, loud, over the top, and just fun. I mean, it was always catchy, and, you had to play it loud or you just weren't even playing it. Yeah, it was just real catchy, and real fun. It was always upbeat, real bright sounds.
Yeah, and every single, another thing to think of, and my brother actually pointed this out to me years ago, is every single band, even to the lowest of the low hair bands, had great guitar players.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, like, I'm gonna throw bands under the bus here, but Godsmack and Nickelback, I'm sorry, but I'll take CC DeVille and Crappy Poison over them any day as far as just straight up guitar playing. It's, everybody in the 80s could do. I don't know of any 80s song that didn't have a solo, or multiple solos.
Yeah, usually multiple.
And you're talking one more thing before we move on. You're talking about how the guys like the heavy stuff and the girls kind of like the ballady stuff. The best example I can give for that is Heavy Metal Parking Lot. Have you seen that?
No.
Basically, it's a legendary movie. If most of you guys listening, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you've watched any of the metal videos, it's very popular. It's about a 15-minute movie where back in the 80s they took a camera into a parking lot before a Judas Priest show, and Dokken was opening up for him. So, it was just crazy partying, good times in the parking lot. Nobody was getting hurt or anything, but everybody's drinking and smoking and all that stuff, and they were just interviewing people. It's a hilarious movie. You can probably find it on YouTube. But the part that I remembered is what you just brought up with the girls and the guys. They interview this group of people, and there's 4 guys, and they're all like beer drinking meathead looking guys, and then the one girl that's squeezed in between them. And they're like, "Who are you guys here to see?" And all the guys go, "Priest, Judas Priest." And then it gets quiet, and the girl jumps out in front and goes, "Dokken."
That's awesome.
So, I mean, that sums up what you just said totally. So,
yeah, that's the other thing about the look. Not to interrupt you, but you were not a true hair band unless you had like a hot girl on your albums or somehow affiliated with the band.
Oh yeah, how did I forget that? I mean, and a lot of times
I'm sorry.
A lot of the bands.
Yeah, there was always a girl, like in the videos or whatever. There was always like a scantily.
And a lot of times, different bands would end up using the same girl on, like, you'd have 5 bands using the same girl on all their album covers. And then, like, half of them would end up dating the girl and trading them back and forth between bands. And that's a whole other subject. Let's not even get into that. 80s, they don't call it the decade of decadence for nothing. And
sex, drugs, rock and roll, man.
Yeah, and that's another sad thing about this. We'll get into that right now. We're going to get into kind of the rise and fall in the history of the genre. Like I said, started in the 70s, early 80s is when you really started seeing the bands come out. Sunset Strip really turned on, and then it was just everybody and their brothers is doing hair bands. Like I said, Kiss started doing it. There were bands. I don't see Motorhead turning into a hair band anytime soon, but
no.
You started seeing bands that they had the style, they didn't have the sound. Wasp. Lizzie Borden, they had the look, but they didn't have the sound. They were pretty much true metal, maybe a ballad here and there, but that kind of stuff carried through. I think basically the late 80s is when it kind of became overexposure to me. You started seeing Motley Crue kind of getting watered down, Poison's kind of getting watered down. That's around the late 80s is when a lot of the like I said, everybody started trying to be a hair band, and there was just too many of them, and it kind of oversaturated the genre. And moving into the 90s, you still had some pretty solid bands. Slaughter, Warrant, they still were putting out some stuff in the 90s. But as most people know, the early 90s into mid 90s, grunge and hip hop were kind of the two things that just kind of took the States by storm, and hair bands were pushed aside. I've read several different metal history books about, bands would go into, I don't remember who it was. I want to say it was Warrant, maybe. They went into their record label one day, and all their posters were replaced with Alice in Chains posters.
Oh, man.
And then it wasn't too long, I saw the writing on the wall, and then that leads to depression, which, they're already a partying band, and the next thing they know, they're drinking and overdosing. And many of the, good, famous 80s bands are just demolished by drug and alcohol abuse and death now. I mean, a lot of them are dead. You know, Janie Lane from Warrant, that's one right there. I could go on and on, but that's the decade of decadence eventually catches up to these guys. You know, Robin Crosby from Rat, one of the best guitar players that came out of the 80s as far as the hair bands go. You know, he had HIV. He didn't really know if it was from sharing women or sharing needles. So, you know, that sums up that whole thing. So, what do you have to add on any of the history or historic things to you, or just in general?
Not a whole lot. I mean, you covered it pretty well. I think I remember, you know, like you had said, where you know all their posters were torn down and stuff. I remember reading where Winger had like called, like it was just not too long after like one of their albums was released. I don't think they like called and like their record label forgot who they were.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, and it was like, you know, they called and it's like, yeah, and who are you guys again? It's like, well, wait, what? And I mean, I may have read something wrong, but I mean, it was something like that, and that was how it was. Whenever it died, I mean, it flat died.
It was quick. Yeah, I even when I was a little kid, you know, the stuff just disappeared off the radio and MTV. It just stopped.
Yeah, you know, like you said, it ended up. I like to characterize grunge as kind of the hangover from the '80s party.
That's a great, yeah.
And I mean, you know, I don't want to get into grunge since we can do that later. But yeah, as far as the history of the '80s and stuff, it ended up, you know, you had a whole culture at the time that was kind of, you know, freewheeling. You know, nobody really cared about consequences and stuff. I mean, it was just kind of a party decade. Sadly, it caught up to most bands. I mean, there's really not too many bands that were big at that time that didn't go through some serious, heavy, you know, bad stuff. And, you know, so I mean, while it's fun to listen to, yeah, the songs are great and everything, you know, those people ended up having a very hard road after that because their fame died.
You know, I think you said on past episodes, if it wasn't for 80s metal, we probably had no VH1 behind the music.
Right.
So, you know, we've got two forms of entertainment off the, you know, somewhat suffering of some of these bands. So, yeah, anyway, that was kind of into the mid 90s. You know, the bands, you know, they don't know any better, most of them. Some of them are entrepreneurs, and they started going in different directions. As far like, I think Gary Cherone from Extreme, I think like he started like building houses, and he was relatively successful at that. So there was a couple of them that got out of the scene that, you know, had businesses or whatever. But I remember so many of them just keep trying to trek along, and I remember I think it was probably it was around the time that I was in junior high. Because I remember you remember the Juke Joint, Rockwell? Yep. Okay. So I remember going to see my first concert there, which was Anthrax. So nice. I knew the venue, and it was like maybe 2 weeks after that, we were driving by, we were downtown Eaton or something, and I drove by, and on the marquee it said Dokken and Warrant, and I'm like, no way, like how are these bands that I saw in these stadiums doing monster ballads? How are they playing in these little clubs? And you know, the people, they just kept trying to live that same lifestyle that they were in the 80s, and it just wasn't working anymore, which led to even more death and abuse and all that stuff. But in the mid 2000s, there started, I don't know, some of the bands started getting reunions together because there were some people that maybe they were going through a midlife crisis because they were teenagers or young adults in the 80s, and then now they're wanting to listen to it again. I don't know what it was, or maybe it was a younger audience. It's kind of like me, you know. I was in my, like, let's say I'm 30 now. I was in my early 20s when I really started getting into it, and because I used to hate the stuff. I hated it, you know, and I knew a couple people when we were in junior high and high school that listened to it because that's what their parents listened to. And I was like, screw that, I'm listening to Pantera, I'm listening to Slayer, Metallica, whatever. I don't need this hair band stuff. But, you know, later on I started getting into it, and I remember the Rocklahoma Festival. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of one thing that kind of springboarded the popularity of 80s metal back. I mean, you started seeing a lot of bands reunite with as many original members, if not all, as they could, to show up at these concerts. And, you know, if you have a festival like that in the middle of Oklahoma, that can get Odin to play on your show,
Nice.
you know that it's bringing back some popularity. And with that, you started seeing bands put out new albums, and you started seeing some newer bands. The Darkness was kind of the first one I remember with, I think it was I Believe in a Thing Called Love.
Yep.
And I was like, this sounds like Queen and like hair bands mixed. And then there were some others thrown in there, and then the latest one has been that I can think of is Steel Panther, and they have it down to a science. The sound is great. That they're kind of they're a good band, but their lyric and content, like, it's over the top 80s stuff, but they just put it all out there. And it's kind of getting on a tangent here. Like, some of their content just kind of turns me off of the music some. What do you have to say about them or the Darkness or any kind of the rise in popularity that we've seen in the 80s metal recently?
Well, specifically on like Steel Panther, I remember I think it came up on like my Facebook feed or something from one of the music websites I follow or something. They're like, oh, check out their, new controversial single called Glory Hole. And, knowing who Steel Panther was, all I could do was do a quick facepalm. So I check it out, and, listening to the old stuff, yeah, it's over the top, yeah, it's overly sexual, yeah, it's, all about the party and all that, but there's some subtlety to it. There's a little bit of nuance in it. It's, with the exception of, a couple Wasp songs, but, for the most part, it's not something that's grotesque. It's all tongue-in-cheek. It's all done with a smile. And like I said, watching that, listening to the lyrics and stuff, I'm like, this is just, it's almost like it's mocking the 80s instead of, like, paying tribute to the 80s. And it was just something that, just completely turned me off. It's like, there's absolutely no subtlety to this. It's just, it's almost gross just to be gross. But like you said, the sound's awesome. Musically, it's great. But like I said, I enjoyed the subtlety and everything that was in the 80s, and some of the new stuff that's coming out that sounds like the hair metal stuff just lacks the subtlety and everything. I enjoyed the Darkness. I never got into them real hard, but I didn't hate them. But as far as like the return of all that, people tend to get reflective, more reflective the older they get. And you had people who grew up partying with all that stuff in the 80s. And then they get to be the older people. They get to be the parents. They have the kids that are wanting to go to concerts and stuff, and they're listening. Good Lord, the early 2000s and all that was not necessarily a great time in pop music. We had just like barely survived the boy bands, and was still suffering some of the lingering effects of that. And I think it was just, you had a lot of people that were like, I miss the days when I didn't have all this responsibility. I didn't have that. I still do it to this day. I get it. We talked about the power of music. You get a feeling, it's like, I want to listen to this. It puts you in a mood. And I think what started happening was collectively that's what you had as a generation that grew up on that hair metal, started getting older, more and more responsibility and stuff. They reflected back to a time where there wasn't that, where it was all fun and games, and I think that's where a lot of the popularity came to. And you had a bunch of aging rock stars that needed an income because they either drank, smoked, or shot up all the money that they'd had.
Yep. I guess a really good example I can give of that is, when it's going to make us sound so old, but when Limp Bizkit first took off, and right in the middle of the new metal, rap metal stuff, they recently got back together, and they've been playing like these stadium festival things. And that's exactly what I think it's exactly what you just said. It's our age people. We're now, almost middle-aged adults, and it's a lot of them wanting to go back to those times of just having fun and not worrying about anything. I think it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, as long as they're going back to like the first Limp Bizkit album and a couple songs off the second one, I don't remember the names of either one of them, to tell you the truth.
Man, I need to go back and review them. I don't even own them anymore, but yeah, that's something I wasn't like a huge fan, but I just definitely didn't have a problem with them or anything.
Well, see, they put out that one album, and I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it had like Counterfeit. They had the cover of Faith on it.
Uh-huh.
And it had like 3 or 4 other just really cool songs. I mean, as far as, new metal stuff like that goes. And then they put out the album with Nookie. And I really can't remember the name of it, and it's really bugging me. But once you got past the actual single, Nookie, there were some good songs on it. And then it got bad.
I remember they did that one with Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots. That was a really good one. But
I don't know that I even remember that.
Yeah, that's like the one I remember more than anything. But anyway, back to the 80s stuff, one thing I'm a little bit disappointed in these reunions is, and I know you're probably going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but you see these guys come back in the mid-2000s, and they've got bandanas on like they're in a hardcore band, across their forehead, above their eyes. They've got the giant Iron Cross belt buckles, black they're just trying to look tough, and I'm like, where's the spandex? Where's the, I don't care if you're going bald and you only have like 2 hairs left. Put those hairs in hairspray.
Yeah.
The only band, and we can go on a bit about this. The only band I can remember doing that was when we saw Quiet Riot. And Stephen Dubrow came out in the spandex cheetah outfit and said he thought they were playing in Branson. You remember that?
Yep.
And I'll translate that into talking about older people living in the decade of decadence. Remember the couple right next to us?
Oh, dude, I try to forget, man. I really do. There is not, like, if I could bleach my eyes and make that go away, I mean, that was, And you weren't even close. Like, you were on the other side of him. I was the one having to stand next to him.
I know. And, we are not getting into details on this, but you can just imagine what these people were doing next to us. The guy had a mullet down to his butt, and, yeah, we're not going to go there, but I had to mention it. So, with that, we pretty much summed up everything that's going on with, hair bands. We're going to get into the bands that we think are kind of the definitive hair bands. When you think of it, or if you're interested in starting to listen to some of it, give it a shot. These are some bands you can check out. I'll start off first with Dokken. They're a little bit on especially the early stuff, maybe a little bit on the heavier side. They weren't quite hair bands, but songs like In My Dreams and Breaking the Chains is another popular one. And they eventually kind of evolved into a hair band. They always had 1 or 2 ballads on every album. Some of them actually weren't too bad. Some of them I just hated. I can't think of there's one that I just really can't stand, and it's very popular. Like, I remember they having a video for it and everything. I just can't remember it, but they're really solid songs. Again, maybe not quite as poppy as some of the other hair bands, but I'll start off with Dokken. So, what's one that you've got to mention?
One for me is Brittany Fox. I don't know. Did they ever have any hit other than Girls' School?
They had a couple of singles, but yeah, they kind of went nowhere other than that song.
But, I mean, I remember that album. I remember picking it up, and they had a couple other songs on there that I liked. One of them, it's weird. I liked listening to it because I couldn't understand what he was actually saying. It said that he was supposed to be saying, like, kick and fight or something like that, and for the life of me, I swear it always sounded like he was saying cook and fight, which just cracked me up and made me want to listen to the song.
Well, he does. He does sound like he smoked so many cigarettes. His voice is just.
Oh yeah. But I don't know that I have seen many videos more just quintessentially hair metal than Girls' School. And just the look of the band, the whole thing. I mean, yeah, it's even kind of the creepy, like 80s stuff, all tied into it. And like I said, I enjoy the song. It's a great song. But yeah, just watch that video. Even if you don't, get into Brittany Fox, the rest of it, just watch the Girls' School video. I mean, it is. If you want to see the 80s summed up in like a 4-minute video, it's that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first song I ever heard from them. I saw that video on VH1 Classic, and I love the guys. Like, I'll be honest, I didn't care for the song as much, but the video summed up the 80s. It was just fun and funny. but his voice was just awesome. And so I went out and bought their greatest hits album because that's where I wanted to start.
Right.
And excellent, the whole album. There's hardly any. Even like I think they had one or two ballads and they weren't even that bad. So yeah, Brittany Fox definitely epitome of hair bands and awesome. Next one on my list is Motley Crue. I mean, come on, they I don't know too many people that don't know Motley Crue, and they kind of started the LA Sunset Strip scene. Them and I think Quiet Riot maybe, but yeah, Motley Crue. When I first thought of Motley Crue, I thought of like Kickstart My Heart, Girls, Dr. Feelgood, which those are all okay songs, but when you start digging deeper into especially their early stuff, basically Too Fast for Love, Shout at the Devil, and Theater of Pain. Those first three are just killer. And they have a couple ballads, but they're really, really good. And they're a little bit even heavier than the traditional stuff. Like they got really popular in the late '80s, but the early '80s Motley Crue stuff, excellent. Go ahead with your next one.
Well, I just want to add on the Motley Crue before I do. You've also got actually some excellent musicianship.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was all catchy, poppy stuff, but I mean, you've got like actually good songs. I mean, it's not stuff that's just written to, play in the background. I mean, it's actually good, solid stuff too. My next band, though, I've got for Whitesnake, and this is kind of a personal one for me. I never really got into the other stuff with Whitesnake. I mean, I know they've got some just great tunes. Other than their real popular ones. Of course, their two big popular ones is This Love, which is another just quintessentially 80s song. That's the one with the girl in the car, right?
No, that's
Here I Go Again.
That and I think they do that on In the Still of the Night, which is one of the greatest songs ever.
Yeah, In the Still of the Night. I forgot about that one.
Wait a minute. I think they use the girl in the car in like every single video in every
That's
single
what I was thinking. I'm pretty sure they do. But no, I mean, Is This Love it's kind of one of those ballads, but it's still a pretty good tune. I enjoy it. And like I said, on a personal note, I had a brother pass away when I was real young. Whitesnake was one of his favorite bands. One of his favorite all-time songs was Here I Go Again. And to this day, that is still one of my top 10 songs. Not just because of that, but I mean, that's a large part of it. So, when I think of hair metal and stuff, that band, has to come up in my mind.
Well, you talk about that, and you said earlier that your sister used to listen to a lot of this stuff, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is, that my sister grew up in, I mean, not that she was like, a real big party or anything. It was just, that was the music whenever she was going through, high school and junior high and high school and everything. It was hair bands. I mean, that was it.
So you might have a little bit more of a family connection type thing with this style of music. So I can't say that. My mom was into 80s pop stuff, and my dad liked 80s stuff, but he liked a few hair bands, but it was more stuff like AC/DC and Wasp. So the only reason, did you have anything else to add on Whitesnake?
No, go ahead.
The only reason I did not put Whitesnake on here is because, and this is kind of a little gem, some people might not know this. The first, David Coverdale originally, his first like main gig was in Deep Purple.
Really?
And Whitesnake actually kind of came out of Deep Purple. So like the first handful of Whitesnake albums are actually sound a lot like Deep Purple. It wasn't until I don't even remember which album it was. There was there was an album right there in the middle where they started kind of sounding hair band, and then the self-titled Whitesnake was full-blown hair band. He got different band members and everything. So, and then they kind of stuck with that style through the 90s, and then up to now they've put out since the 2000s. I think they put out 2 albums, and they're excellent. They're very good produced. The musicianship is great. Singers still got it. I mean, it sounds like Whitesnake.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
And that's another thing. It's hard for when some of these bands do a reunion and put out an album. A lot of times it sucks because they try to change their style or something instead of just being what they are. and that's something Whitesnake doesn't do. They put out consistent albums, but I didn't add them to my list only because they were kind of half hair band, half like kind of blues boogie rock band, which I like both, but it was just kind of two different bands. So, okay, so going forward, our next three are actually the same. We'll start off with Winger. Yeah, the Winger is the ultimate butt of the jokes. No pun intended for 80s metal. Wow, I don't even know where to start with this band. The first time I ever heard of them was Beavis and Butthead. What's the guy that they pick on all the time? I can't remember his name.
I can't either.
You had the AC/DC T-shirt and you had the Metallica T-shirt with Beavis and Butthead, and then this kid's the nerd wearing the Winger shirt.
Yep.
I didn't have any idea who it was at the time, so I started doing some research, and I was like, wow, this Kip Winger guy, he looks like he wears so much Brute cologne that I could like smell it through the TV screen.
Yeah.
He wears his shirts hanging off of him. He doesn't even play his bass half the time, and I'm like, well, no wonder this is a joke. But you start, when you kind of put that stuff aside and you start listening to some of the music, they are really good musicians. They're kind of the ultimate combination of the 80s kind of decadent look and stuff, but being really good musicians. So, what do you have to get your input on Winger?
Well, like you said, kind of the butt of the jokes and stuff. They kind of had a little bit of a feud there. I say a feud. I don't know that it was technically a feud, but they had a little bit of friction, I guess you would say, with Metallica there for a little bit. And I was like you watch the Winger videos and stuff, and all you see is like, his like open chest. And, like I said, instead of sound waves, you're getting Brute. And, but once you get the music, it was great. But, in Metallica's, I think it's Nothing Else Matters video, they're like pulling darts out of a poster of Winger.
Yeah.
And, they had asked Kip about it, and, he was talking about how crappy musicians, Metallica was compared to them and all this and that. And, I was like, wait, what? I don't know that I go that far. But, I'm like you. You get into the actual music of Winger. If you can get past... Of course, their new look actually is not too bad. They don't have the real cheesy kind of overly 80s stuff anymore. At least not the, I was seeing the other day.
Yeah, they don't. Most of the 80s bands have kind of put that stuff behind them, sadly. That was part of the genre, in my opinion. Like I said, I don't care if they're 300 pounds. And, Yngwie Malmsteen still does it. We went and saw him, and, he's an older guy, and he's gained a lot of weight, and his leather pants were kind of not being able to keep tied. But, hey, he kept wearing them.
That's so amazing.
It is.
But, no, Winger's one of those bands that was they came out at the wrong time.
Yeah.
If they had come out just a couple years earlier, they were a big, very successful band anyway, but they could have been just massive.
Yeah, I think that was 88 was that first self-titled album that came out, I believe. And yeah, if you would have put that like 85, oh man.
Yep.
They would have been right up there with Bon Jovi.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they had just so good music. Just catchy stuff. It was great. And I guess their new stuff, I haven't taken the time to actually really dig into it, but I guess their new stuff's actually pretty good too.
Yeah, it's good. It's almost kind of like you can tell it's Winger, but it's kind of what I said earlier. Sometimes some of these 80s bands they update a little bit too much. Like Whitesnake does it perfect. They sound modern, but they still have that great 80s sound. And Winger, Christ, I think they're trying to be a little bit too more modern, but it's still good. So.
Well, see, I know I was doing some research and everything, and they were saying that they almost consider themselves kind of like a pop prog band anymore.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And it's like it's like if you went to see Dream Theater do kind of hair metal-ish type stuff.
Yeah.
And they like to compare themselves talent-wise to Dream Theater a lot, it seems. So.
Which they're not even. They're not even on the same planet as Dream Theater, but that's a whole nother thing.
Well, right, but at least they kept that 80s ego.
Yeah, that's true.
So, at least there's that. All right, what else you got, man?
All right, we're moving on. Again, these next two we kind of had we were comparing notes before the show. Winger was both on our list. These next two are both on our list, and I'm only putting these kind of in this order because one of them is my favorite band. But we'll go with Poison as our next. To me, Poison is the epitome of hair bands. They've got the total package. They've got in the early stuff, in the early career, they've got some of the little bit heavier guitar riffs, but really quick they start seeing the chicks like the ballads. They start doing the ballads. You know, Every Rose Has Its Thorn. Everybody knows that song. They started looking more and more, you know, like as much like chicks as they possibly could. The more makeup, the more pink, the more streamers, the more bracelets. They're just to me, they're the epitome of 80s metal. And even into the 90s, they stuck true with the sound. You know, there was one thing I'll bring up with them and many of these other bands. Did you ever notice, like, towards the end of the 80s, into the 90s, like, a lot of these hair bands they went through this cowboy phase?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like, isn't that weird? Like, all of a sudden they all wanted to start wearing boots and cowboy hats and all this stuff, and I didn't really get it, but, you know, it's just something else to throw out there. But yeah, Poison's definitely one of the top. They're definitely the most, I guess you could say, pop-friendly, easy to listen to of the bands. You know, very catchy, sing-along songs kind of stuff. Not as heavy as the Motley Crues even, or Dokken, Winger. The stuff's all a little bit heavier than Poison. But what do you have to add on Poison?
Like you said, Poison kind of had everything. They had a lot of the ballads. I mean, come on, one of the most famous ballads ever is Every Rose Has Its Thorn. I don't care if you listen to nothing but, like, you know, classical music, you still know that song. They even had the censored album covers. You know, they were even tied into that whole thing. And the name just left me. It's the one where they had, you know, the girl, like,
the tongue, right?
Yeah, and her tongue was sticking out, and somehow they called that obscene. I mean, it came out, like, to a long point. And, you know, I still remember my sister actually had that cassette, you know, with the uncensored album cover, and they ended up changing it back to just the eyes.
Oh, how times change. They censor out a long tongue. What would they think of now?
Oh, good Lord. I mean, it's unreal. But no, I mean, the band even did, like, you know, kind of like an ode to motorcyclists and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's perfectly 80s. You know, I mean, you look at Motley Crue, you know, motorcycle sounds on the girls, and all that. And Poison writes basically what amounts to a love song to motorcycles.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was good music and stuff. You got songs like Unskinny Bop, which is just one of those you just kind of nod your head and go. I mean, it's just very, very catchy. And that, to me, I just think Bret Michaels. And you see him today, and you know that he was in an 80s hair band.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even today. I mean, you know, just there's no doubt about it.
All right, well, I think we've covered Poison, so we're going to move on to... We didn't really do these in order, per se, but we saved this one for last, because this is a personal favorite of mine, and I know you like him too, and that's Ratt.
Oh, yeah.
Ratt's the first hair band I've ever seen, period. First video I've ever seen. Body Talk was the first song I heard, and the second song I ever heard was Lay It Down. Not Round and Round, which is an okay song, but Body Talk and Lay It Down, those are the two songs that first kind of turned me on to them, and I will definitely I haven't decided which, but I'm going to put a Ratt song in our picks this week. So they had some of the catchiest riffs and the catchiest vocal, not really sing-along, but the way that Stephen Pearcy just kind of sings, I don't know, it's very, very catchy, but you can sing along with the songs, but definitely had an edge, and the guitar solos were great. Robin Crosby, you know, I know he passed away, but still one of my favorite guitar players ever. So what do you got to add on Ratt?
Every time I think of Ratt, it's not my favorite song by him, but it's the one that always comes to mind, and that's Way Cool Jr.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that, you know, if you look up the lyrics and watch the song, or watch the video, listen to the song and all that, to me, that's kind of the 80s, too. You got this kind of, I mean, it's bluesy, you know, but it's just, yeah, you know, it's Way Cool Jr. And you got his voice. I mean, that guy's voice was just, it was so just awesome and unique.
Yeah, it stood out compared to some of the hair bands, just totally.
Yeah, and some people, tried to do a similar vocal style, but it was just you could always pick his out.
If you ever want a band, this is kind of a side note, a band that sounds almost just like Rat is the Christian metal band White Cross. You know, all the Christian bands. There's always in the '80s and '90s. You know, they would always pick a band and try to emulate them, like so they'd have the Christian alternative to them. And White Cross sounds just like Rat. It's like other Rat albums. So if you really like Rat, you definitely check out White Cross. They're awesome as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's awesome. But with Rat, you also had that perfect '80s look. I remember one of the first videos I saw of theirs was Round and Round. I don't think I've ever seen so much pink and white, for a band. I mean, it was unreal. And, you had, the little leg kind of bounce and stuff like that, and, the hair was out all over, and like you said, there was, like, streamers and everything just all over the place. Just amazing energy. Watching them. My personal favorite song of theirs is You're in Love.
Yep, great one.
I mean, that song's just, it's great. I know we've talked about it before. I was introduced to Rat after they were already pretty much done as far as, putting out a lot of stuff. I mean, I got into the, it's like the Rat and Roll, like their greatest hits.
Yeah, me too. I bought that in like the early 2000s as I was starting to get back into the hair bands.
Yeah, my sister had that Rat and Roll. I mean, she had the other ones too, but that's the one I remember her playing. And like you said, you've got Body Talk, Round and Round's honestly one of probably the worst ones on that entire album.
I agree.
You get to You're in Love, and then there's one other one that I can't remember the name of. But it's like the Loose Lips and all that.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of it.
But yeah, to me that song's just kind of it helps sum up the '80s as well. Because there's so much innuendo flying around with Rat.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's dripping with innuendo, and I guess even I didn't realize this until I was doing research for this show. A couple of their album covers were actually kind of looked down upon, and they changed them and all that. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know. Rat's one of my top hair bands. I mean, probably top 3, if not top 1 or 2.
One thing I could say about Rat that I can't really say about most of these other hair bands. In fact, like really quick, I'm trying to think of some other bands, and unless they were one of those kind of, 2 albums and done type bands, I don't really count those, but any band that's put out, 5 or more albums, I can't think of a band that's been more consistent than Rat. I mean, every time you buy a Rat album, it's just more of the same, but not necessarily better or worse, just more of the same. It's like a continuation. And even when they got into the 90s, and they did I think they did a self-titled record in the 90s that was just average, but it wasn't terrible. Then they came back in the 2000s, and when they reunited, everybody but Robin Crosby, and in fact, I think they recruited one of the guitar players from Quiet Riot for that one. But the one they put out in the 2000s, I was actually really surprised because it was Rat. It had a little bit more of a modern sound to them, but it was still Rat and it's still catchy. And just one of the most, if you want one of the most consistent, catchy hair bands, Rat is it.
I remember whenever we saw them. Now, whenever we went and saw them, didn't they have like one member was all that was actually left?
2. They had 2. They had Bobby Blotzer, the drummer, and Warren DeMartini, the original guitar player. They only were a 4-piece at the time, so they had a bass player and a singer that was kind of a fill-in.
Yeah, because I forgot that the drummer was actually a part of it too. I remember the guitar player was. But no, I mean they were even fun then. Honestly, I mean that was that Rock Never Stopped show. That was a good time. But I still think Quiet Riot though.
Yeah, seriously, that whole show, was the epitome of the '80s, and what was it, like 2005?
Yeah. And, it wasn't too long after that. It wasn't too long whenever like one or two of the members of Quiet Riot like died or something, didn't
they? Yeah,
the
singer. It was just a few weeks after that.
Yeah. So I couldn't remember how long ago it was, but yeah. I remember a couple other things. I don't want to repeat it on here. because we try to keep it a little clean. But, you know, whenever he was talking about a couple of their songs, you know, the drummer shouting out different stuff and everything.
I totally forgot about that.
And, I mean, you know, that just totally sticks out in my mind. I mean, I know that's not rap, but it just...
Oh, we're talking about hair bands. That's what this is, the Decade of Decadence.
Yeah, and that whole line, I mean, it was great.
And if you remember, a couple of the band members, like, turned around and looked at him and gave him a really weird look.
Oh, yeah, it was like he wasn't supposed to say it.
No.
Yeah, it was totally one of those just great moments, you know, for concerts and everything. And like I said, you know, the guy died not long after we saw that, you know, so I mean, you know, never get to see that again. So
no, and sadly, that's, you know, a lot of this hair bands. The only thing you got to live it through is, you know, watching the videos on YouTube, buying the records, or downloading greatest hits albums. I mean, the music's all they've left us with, because, you know, most of them are not getting back together, or if they are, some of them are putting out subpar music. You know, I've heard Motley Crue's just about done.
Yep.
Some of these other bands that reunited, they might do one album and then done. You know, so it's kind of bittersweet, because, you know, as we've said, overall this music it was just nothing but good times, fun. Even to this day, you put on any of these bands we talked about, and the music's just fun, but it also had consequences that went with the fun. And, you know, it's kind of, I don't know, unless you grew up around the times, it's kind of done, because you can show people this, a lot of, I'll say, younger, you know, teenagers, young adults, show them some of this 80s stuff, and they don't understand it at all. So it's kind of going by the wayside, but, you know, it is what it is.
yeah, but no, I remember it was the same show, Cinderella. We didn't mention Cinderella, you know, in our 5, but, you know, we could have easily. I know, I love Cinderella, but I remember, you know, their guitar player sat there and changed guitars, like, during one song, like 6 times?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And even during one of them, he brought out, like, a saxophone.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you know, here you got a guitar solo, and he breaks out a saxophone. You know, it was just, they were doing, you know, they did the pyrotechnics and all that fun stuff, too. And, you know, you're inside and all that. I mean, it was just, they were fun to watch. I enjoyed it.
It was
too.
a total 80s show, top to bottom. I mean, you know, some of them were fat, and some of them were wearing jeans instead of spandex and had short hair, but who cares? It was the same thing.
Yep. Yeah, it was great.
One other thing I'll add about Cinderella, most people know Spinal Tap. If you don't know Spinal Tap, go out and watch it right now. As soon as you hear this, go download it, go buy it, whatever you got to do to see it. YouTube even, just you got to go watch Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap basically is a mockumentary of 80s. You know, just from the top to the bottom. Their music isn't totally 80s, but the whole movie sums up 80s.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. It's so funny.
And with that, there was all these what are considered Spinal Tap moments, where something bad happens to the band, and those were inspired by actual events that happened to bands that they used in the movie. So one thing that, you know, you weren't with us. We went to, I think it was St. Louis, that we went and saw Poison and Cinderella, and it was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. We just decided to go, and Cinderella was getting ready to take the stage, and they start playing the intro music, and everybody's getting excited. And the big Cinderella banner starts dropping really slowly in the background, and all of a sudden one side gets hung up. Oh. And it starts like dropping sideways, and here comes the guitar player, and the sign like takes out the guitar player. No joke. And I'm like, that made the whole show for me. I'll never forget it. The ultimate Spinal Tap moment. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
One other thing I'll add too before we close out here, two more things actually. You know, we're talking about Spinal Tap, and one movie, you know, there's a lot of good 80s metal movies, and the one that I can definitely encourage you to watch, again, it's bittersweet, is Decline of the Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years. We've talked about it before, but it just sums up top to bottom. You know, there's good and there's bad, and it's depressing both ways. It makes you wish that, you know, music was kind of fun again, like some of these bands make it, where it's just about having a good time and not being so serious or whatever. But then they show the consequences, you know, Chris Holmes from Wasp drinking himself to oblivion in front of his mom in front of the pool. Odin, is sitting there watching it in hindsight. They're talking about how they're going to be the biggest band in the world, and they ended up being nothing essentially, except for to people like us that are into niche bands. So, and then they have Megadeth, which Megadeth got nothing but more popular after that, and they weren't a hair band at all. So it's just an interesting movie that it's kind of rare actually that you guys could check out. So, and then as far as like a movie soundtrack, Brett, I'm pretty sure you don't know this, but you may. There's a really obscure 80s metal movie called Black Roses, where like this kind of these aliens take over this small town and they lure them in with 80s hairband music, and then the next thing you know, they turn on their parents. It's a cheesy horror movie, but anyway, one of the best soundtracks ever. They kind of put together an all-star band with some members from like I know there's some members from like King Cobra in it, and I can't remember the other ones, but then they had some other bands like Lizzie Borden was on there, Rigor Mortis, Bang Tango. I mean, there's just some really awesome bands that were on there. And so a few honorable mention bands before we close out. Great White, we haven't mentioned them. Kix, Vinnie Vincent Invasion. I already mentioned Warrant and Slaughter. Two bands that are kind of off the wall. Nitro. They really don't sound like hair band at all. Michelangelo Badio, he's like a guitar virtuoso. If you don't know who he is, look it up on YouTube. He plays like 4, 5, 6 necked guitars, just solo all. But they have the highest pitched vocals I've ever heard on any metal band. Period.
Awesome.
It's rumored that the guy could break glass with his vocals.
Sweet.
So that, and they had hair stacked to the sky. They had the whole thing. So, and then the other one, totally underrated and unexpected. Most of you are probably not going to know this, but Pantera. Yes, that Pantera. They had their first 4 albums were, kind of a mix between that 80s stuff and Van Halen. A lot of innuendo, a lot of catchy hooks. Dime playing awesome guitar solos. But go back, you can find these videos all over YouTube. Phil, he won't talk about it, but you can go back and find videos of Phil where he's wearing spandex, and I actually, you can kind of see it in Cowboys from Hell. Is kind of where they started transitioning into the heavier stuff. But the album before that, Power Metal, Phil's vocals are amazing on that, and that's some of the best. I mean, the hairband stuff from from Pantera is just excellent. A lot of people make fun of it. It's really hard to find too. If you can find their albums, they're very expensive. But that's one thing I just wanted to get out there. So if you haven't heard the Pantera hairband stuff yet, go check it out. So do you got anything to add as far as bands we haven't mentioned?
Honestly, none real that's like real obscure or anything. So.
All right. Well, we've done the best we can as far as covering the hair bands. So hopefully, you'll go check out one of these bands. No matter, we've mentioned a ton, so you've got a lot to work with. Check out our picks of the week. We're gonna at least have, probably about 1 or 2 a piece of these bands we've mentioned, and some of the songs. We'll put the videos up so you can check them out. Make it easy for you. If you like it, go buy some more of these bands' albums. So with that, we'll close out the show. Next week, we'll come back with another genre to talk about. So until then, keep listening to music, keep jamming.
Keep rocking.